Hello and thank you for joining in on today's training. Heart & Solutions is a proud provider of CE-eligible trainings for our counseling community. This training may be eligible for continuing education credit hours through either the National Board for Certified Counselors, provider number 7376, or the Association of Play Therapy, provider number 21-645. To obtain CE hours for today's training, be sure to follow the steps in the description below to find and take your quiz.
Welcome to another episode of You Need a Training. In today's live webinar, or for those of you that are joining us later, your non-live webinar, your recorded training, we are going to be focusing on extending empathy in schools. Today's training is presented by Briannan LMSW, and today's training will focus on extending empathy in the school setting. This includes exploring the impacts that increasing empathy can have on staff at the school, as well as the children attending the school. During the next hour, Bree will go over things like the definition of empathy, why empathy is important in a school setting, different ways to show empathy in schools, ways to check in with ourselves and assess if we're being empathetic or as empathetic as we could be, as well as some different resources to learn more about how to effectively extend empathy in school settings. And before we begin, I'd like to share a little bit more about our presenter, Bree. Bree is a therapist here at Heart Solutions, where she provides school-based and virtual therapy services, assisting a variety of people with different diagnoses. Bree is especially passionate about working with children and adolescents with trauma, attachment, adjustment disorders, relationship stressors, anxiety, depression, mood disorders, impulse control, disordered eating, grief and loss, adoption and parenting difficulties, and anger management. Bree uses a person-centered, strengths-based approach to assist clients in overcoming their current struggles so they can be their best selves. Some of her experience includes working with individuals with disabilities, being a sexual assault advocate, a BHIS caseworker, working in substance use settings, and doing therapy internships. And as I mentioned, Bree is currently in a school setting and has a wealth of experience in working with students, parents, and school faculty in that setting. And so as we dive into today's training and learning more about extending empathy in a school setting, we're going to pay particular attention to learning the importance behind showing empathy in the school setting, exploring 3 different ways that we can show empathy, as well as learning multiple approaches to help increase empathy in the school environment as a whole. So Bree, such a necessary topic for those that are live with us, right? Or maybe those joining us later. Right now it is July. So I think the kids that we work with are trying to avoid thinking about school settings, but for those of us that work in schools or work with children in schools, really gearing up to head back to school here in the next month or so, and thinking about how to do that with a more empathetic viewpoint and starting that year off the best we can. So I'm excited to hear more.
Yeah, I think sometimes it's just something we forget because we have such crazy busy lives that, yeah, sometimes it gets put on the back burner, but a good reminder is nice.
But yeah, absolutely, Bree, something that we, I don't want to say forget about, right? But I think it's one of those things that, especially as mental health providers, we may have a tendency to become really comfortable with the idea of empathy, right? And kind of like all skills, when we're not actively aware of it and actively practicing that and being, cognizant of that behavior, it can get really lax, right? And so while yes, I feel like in general I'm an empathetic person, it's not a skill that we spend, most of us probably spend a significant amount of time kind of practicing and crafting. And so a great opportunity to do some of those self-observations and check-ins before going back into the school year.
Definitely. And sometimes with the more flexible summer schedules too, we aren't around as many people, things like that, for sure the kids. So yeah, good reminder. So high reliability schools is something, the school that I work at, uses. And so the faculty and staff perceive the school environment as safe and orderly is something they kind of strive for. And so this training relates to that, with when staff members are empathetic and support each other, it increases the staff's feelings of safety. And then outside of just the staff, students, parents, and the community also perceive the school environment as safe and orderly is another thing that they strive for. So when students feel staff are empathetic and understanding, it increases their feelings of safety as well. When kids feel this way, parents recognize that as well. So yeah, just
So
kind of a focus of the training.
Yeah, being a provider who isn't in the school system, I'm not sure I've heard of the term high reliability schools before, right? So what I'm understanding is that if we're kind of conceptualizing or classifying a school as a high reliability school, there's kind of those two components that staff and faculty feel that the environment is safe, as well as students and their parents in the community. So I'm taking some notes like, oh, those are things I should be asking about, in addition to just asking general school questions, right? When I'm doing assessments or meeting with children.
Yep. So why is empathy in the school setting important? When students feel empathy from staff, they feel comfortable and open to talking about things going on in their lives, and this allows them to work better with staff. So if they feel like they're understood and being heard, they will feel more comfortable maybe explaining, I wasn't able to get this assignment done because something in my life is going on, which in turn, if that staff is showing empathy, could be understanding and extend that deadline. Or it's not always a free pass, like, oh, just don't even worry about it at all. It's just kind of working together, compromising, figuring out something that works for both parties. Sympathy towards students actually decreases learning as students don't feel understood or supported. They just feel like that teacher maybe looks down on them or feels bad for them. Modeling empathy towards students can show them ways to be empathetic towards staff, other students, whoever in their life, can just kind of teach them some of those life skills and how important empathy really is. Sort of shaping them as good people in general. So empathy versus sympathy. Empathy is more putting yourself in somebody else's shoes, trying to relate to how they might be feeling, where sympathy is just kind of feeling bad for that person, like seeing where they are and just feeling bad for them, but not putting ourselves where they might be.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think it's an important distinction, right? Especially when we're working with children, right? And their caregivers who maybe don't understand that difference as well, or some of the children that we work with maybe haven't been modeled those differences. And so thinking about kind of, yes, I can understand like what you're going through. I kind of that recognition, like, yeah, that's tough, right? Versus that empathetic piece of really understanding and not just understanding, right? But experiencing somebody else's feelings and that emotional connectivity that comes with that.
Not that it fully relates, but I've had quite a few kids that I work with recently, probably because they're home and around parents more, say, I want them to understand where I'm coming from. Like they just say no when they don't care, but I just want them to understand how I'm feeling and what's going on. So I think it
Yeah.
relates to a lot of different areas of people's lives.
And I think that's such an important kind of piece of this because colloquially, right? Like, yes, I want them to understand. Like that understand is a word we throw around, but what you're saying, right? And what those individuals are saying to you isn't like, oh, I want them to understand that this situation is sad, right? I want them to feel that feeling with me, right? And so yes, they may understand like that stinks when somebody gets hurt, right? Or when I don't do what I'm supposed to do, like, oh, right. That's that sympathetic part of like, yeah, that situation isn't great. But taking that step further, right? What you're describing, that you're hearing from the families you work with is like, oh, I want them to feel what I'm feeling, right? So that they can grasp what that feeling is, not just the situation. and helping, obviously, what we're talking about today, right? Like, how do we do that in the school as well? How do we connect on that level with students?
Yeah. And the funny part is we've also had conversations about somebody can be empathetic and put themselves in your shoes without completely agreeing with you. They don't have to be 100% on the same page as you to understand and feel kind of what you're feeling. So kind of going along with empathy and sympathy, an easy way to kind of teach kids, families, whoever you're working with about it. Brene Brown has an awesome video that kind of explains the difference between the two and what those look like. So we are going to watch that.
So what is empathy and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, you climb down. I know what it's like down here and you're not alone. Sympathy is, woo, it's bad, no, you want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with at least. Yeah. And we do it all the time, because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So I had a miscarriage. At least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now. I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
What a great video, Bri, right? Like, just giving that visualization to everything you were just talking about, right? And in the school system, right, your second bullet point there, sympathy decreases, that learning response, because it's that creature at the top of the hole, right? Of like, stinks to be you, right? Like, get your homework turned in, right? Or those at least statements, right? Even if we don't specifically start the sentence with at least, I think our behavior towards students can replicate that feeling, right? Of like, oh, my mom's really sick. At least she didn't die, right? Like, becomes, okay, I'll give you one extra day to get your work done, right? Versus that empathetic response that could really alter expectations, right? And make a plan with the student and really get into that hole with them. And think about if a feeling that we've had of, okay, someone in my life was really, really sick or hospitalized, right? Like, I wouldn't want to do math homework that week, right? And so thinking about those at least sympathetic responses, not only as statements, but as actions as well, and catching ourselves if we're doing those.
Definitely. We had some good conversations when I presented this at the professional development day at the school I work at, between staff members, like the difference between when they have something going on in their lives and trying to meet all the expectations that are required of them how the difference between sympathy and empathy, that other staff saying like, oh my gosh, I've like been in a situation similar, and it is stressful trying to get this and this done when all you want to think and focus on is this, and just having that support and person there for you is huge. So kind of sticking on the staff page, faculty faces a huge dilemma of balancing the time it takes to practice empathy, so extending deadlines, allowing retakes, and fulfilling all of their other obligations and expectations. So they have extra meetings, they have PD days, they have grading they have to do. Sometimes like admin or other people in their lives are adding things for them to change or add to their schedules. So there's a lot of different options to choose from. So I wanted to shout out all the teachers, school staff, everybody, all the work that you do. It's really hard to sometimes extend empathy when you're being disrespected or don't get that back from students. So just wanted to put a little plug in that your work is hugely important.
Absolutely. And I think, depending on going back to your first slide, right, of what kind of school am I working in, or what kind of school are my clients attending, right? And, or what kind of school, right? Maybe I'm working with an adult who is a teacher in a school, any number of those situations. And if I'm in a school that maybe isn't the safest environment, or if I'm in a school that has a higher number of children experiencing, various stages of low socioeconomic status, right, and hunger, and and all sorts of kind of difficult life situations, empathy is taught, right? And so knowing we may be working with several children who haven't been modeled or taught that empathy piece. And so it is an act of love and service for it to be giving and giving. And like that video by Brene Brown said, it's a vulnerable state, right? This isn't an easy thing. And so those staff members, those school counselors, those therapists, that are school based, are making themselves vulnerable over and over and over again. And then, like you said, maybe we are in an environment where kids don't have the capacity, right, to give empathy even to their peers, right? And so it's like, okay, how do I keep giving so that they can learn to give to each other and take that home to their families and their friends?
Yeah, and it impacts everybody. Admin to staff, admin to students. When there's like issues happening, can I understand where this kid is coming from and work with them to try to figure out the best thing going forward so it doesn't happen again, or support them enough so they feel comfortable in this situation coming to me versus acting out, or what? It's everybody in the entire school and parents and friends, kind of like you said. So
Absolutely.
big impact. Definition: school empathy is the degree to which staff works to deeply understand students' personal and social situations, feel caring and concern in response to students' positive and negative emotions, and communicate their understanding and caring to students through their behavior. So rather than being a characteristic staff does or does not have, it's a continuum. Like, you get to decide how much or how little to balance with all of the other things going on. And it kind of just depends too. Like, I don't know if later I have a slide, but kind of something you said at the very beginning, sometimes we need to check in with where we're at. Because if you're burnt out, if you have other things going on in your life, sometimes that's a skill we don't focus on as much. We're just kind of surviving. And so, yeah, it does change, and it's on a continuum of how much or how little we're showing empathy.
Absolutely. And I think, creating a school environment, a work environment, where we can communicate our availability, right, to our staff. And maybe we're working with some children who have some higher needs from staff right now, and maybe they need more, and this was unrelated to a school environment, right? But I was at a training one time and they were talking about relationships in general, and especially kind of romantic partnerships. But I think it can really be applied to any number of situations. And what they were talking about is in marriage, right? Or in partnerships, we often hear the phrase of like, it's 50-50. And they're like, no, right? Like some days, maybe, right? Like maybe on an odd day, it's 50-50. But the relationship itself needs to always be at 100%. And so thinking about this in a school context, right? If I'm working with my school team, maybe I'm the school-based therapist, right? And there's a school counselor on staff, then maybe there's a behavioral specialist, maybe there's a resource officer, and then a couple teachers that are really close to the student. Being able to communicate with one another of, hey, like I've got some high stress stuff in my life, right? Like right now, I've got like 20% to give, right? Where are you at, Bree, right? Like where are you at? Where are you? And making sure that cumulatively we're at 100%, right? And knowing that there's going to be days that maybe like life's good, right? Like I just got back from vacation, I'm fresh, I'm ready. And I can be like, guys, I've got 90%, right? Like I got this, like, let me do this week. I can get in that hole and be good with this kid. And keeping in mind too, that there may be times, the last week of school, right? A couple days before Christmas break, during finals week, right? Where we're all going, I got 10, I got 5, I got, and it's like, okay, we're cumulatively at 60%. Like, what are we willing to do to get to that 100? Like, what can we all do to get there together? And that's what really came to mind for me hearing you talk about this, right? Is my ability to be not only empathetic, but effectively empathetic is going to depend on what I've got. And being able to communicate that with your team so that we can give what we can, and do that in the best way possible.
Yeah, that collaboration is huge and necessary to be able to support each other, to support students, kind of everybody. So some different ways to show empathy, cognitively, taking students' perspectives and understandings, things going on in their life, feelings about class, learning disabilities, just taking kind of all of that into account. Affectively, focusing on feelings, and is typically defined as feeling what the other person feels. So that's kind of going back to that Brene Brown video, like putting yourself in those shoes, feeling, connecting to that feeling somehow. And then behaviorally, how we choose to interact with the student, the other staff, whoever it is, based on the understanding of the struggle that they're going through. So lots of different ways to kind of connect to that empathy. So it's really important for staff to set boundaries with their empathy so they don't become overwhelmed. This is the slide I was thinking of, by the intensity of students' negative experiences. Compassion fatigue is a huge thing that we talk about in therapy, but also with school staff and a lot of other careers. So being always accessible to students and trying to act as a therapist, because sometimes they feel comfortable and might lead to something like that, is not a part of school empathy. That's my job. So staff high in school empathy are likely to refer students to counseling, academic support, and other resources to make sure that student is getting everything they need while also not putting too much on the staff's plate.
I love that, right? And kind of clarifying those boundaries with school staff, right? If you're in a position like Bree and you're a school-based therapist, right? Like helping them understand, I've got this, right? Like this is my role. What I need from you is this, right? I need you to recognize being empathetic, right? Like feeling what they're feeling and kind of thinking about what would you need? And for most of us, right? Like I need Bree, right? I need to go talk to somebody. And yeah, I love that.
And it's a huge push right now in schools is for like staff to be building those relationships with students so that they feel comfortable enough to talk through some of the things they're going through. But it's kind of that example from before, like I couldn't get my homework done because this is going on in my life. Can you work with me? extend into empathy in those situations, but once it gets to a certain point, knowing like how to refer and what those resources are. Some things that we can do to increase school empathy would be staff developing a deep understanding of students' social contexts so they can generate less negative explanations for undesirable student behaviors. This made me think of, I think now we have a lot more research and understand that behavior is communication. And I think a lot of sometimes we get stuck in like an older school mindset, like they're just acting out for attention. They're just acting out for this reason or that reason, not really thinking about deeper stuff going on or what that could be trying to communicate. So, and can also be difficult because a lot of staff they don't know kids' backgrounds unless that student does feel comfortable enough to share some of those things. Like staff don't get to go to meetings where it says, oh, this student is struggling with this right now, and this student's family situation is not great. And so they don't know those things unless a student opens up to them and talks about it. So it can be hard, but it's also possible. Staff makes time to learn more about their own students' contexts. Staff design course policies that reflect a deep understanding of personal and social situations. So whether that is some options for retakes or time where kids can come in and get assistance with different things if they need it. Yeah, just kind of being understanding that things come up and not having too strict of guidelines for classes. Building flexibility into due dates, explaining the rationale behind policies, let students know that the staff member is aware that things come up. Staff, high in school empathy does not lower standards. They identify and remove obstacles to learning. So that's kind of what I talked about at the very beginning. It's not a free pass, like, oh, just don't do it at all. It's, I still want you to learn this, but I'm willing to work with you to be able to get it done. And then lastly, understanding students' experiences of stereotype threats. So uncertainty, fear of failure, a lot of different responsibilities if they're involved in a lot of different things can help staff high in empathy find ways to reduce stereotype threats in their class. So
I think that's such a great list, right? And I love that reminder that, like, if this is a school that's high in empathy, it doesn't mean they have lower standards, right? And really reframing that from, oh, like, you just want me to let them get away with everything, right? You just want, like, they're never going to have to turn in any work, and really highlighting that that's not what empathy is, right? And really just making sure that we're mindful of that. And I know, Bree, that you mentioned that you've presented this training before, and putting you on the spot a little bit, right? But I'm curious, like, following that training, because it's a school you get to spend a lot of time in, have you seen any of this implemented or gotten any feedback just on what differences some of these have meant for individual teachers or classrooms or students?
yeah, I had a couple teachers just talk about at the beginning when we talked, it's a good reminder. Like sometimes we get so caught up in deadlines and things our checklist for the day and these things that we just space how important it is to be understanding and support other people in our lives. So talked about how it was a good reminder. And I want to say it was like the PD before the last day of school where things get a little out of control sometimes. So was a good reminder. And then with the high reliability school stuff, the admin had kind of set goals for the teachers to like pick a couple kids that maybe they don't have the best relationships with, or there's some turmoil there, and just make an effort to say hi to that kid in the hallway, or just sort of make little connections, taking steps towards that school empathy. So yeah, they did kind of put some things in place, and then also heard from staff members, like just a great reminder to be there for other staff when they're struggling, to be understanding when kids have difficult things going on or not meeting their expectations. Just hugely that understanding piece and being a support.
Absolutely.
questions to consider when working with students. So what words do I hope my students use to describe me? This was fun when I was going through this for myself, because I was like, oh, they'd be like, she's quirky and goofy and like all of these things. What do I say and do on a regular basis so that my students are likely to use the words I hope that they use? So that one for me was like supportive, genuine. What words do I think my students would actually use to describe me? If the words my students use to describe me are different from the words I hope they use, what things could I be making different to kind of bring these two things closer together? Would I want anyone to say or do to me what I have just said to my students? If in anything I say or do, what do I hope to accomplish? Am I saying or doing things in a way in which my students are most likely to listen to what I have to say, not become defensive and shut down, and respond in a constructive manner? So this one, when I presented the training before, was kind of an eye opener for a lot of staff, like going through these questions, and we kind of all talked in small groups and different things like that. And we had a great conversation about, in your everyday life, if somebody's raising their voice and you're having a conversation in that way, how does that make you want to respond versus having a calm conversation and like talking through things? And then the difference between what they would hope the students would say about them and what they think they probably do say about them was kind of an eye opener a little bit.
Yeah, I really like those questions, right? And again, thinking about going into the start of the school year, right? Like what an opportunity to be able to get kids thinking and reflecting, and teachers reflecting right before starting the year. And especially that top question, right? Like, how do I want them to describe me this year? And maybe they don't know me yet. Maybe I'm a new teacher to the school, or maybe there's kids in there that are new, right? Or I've never had them in class before, and using those answers, right, as a framework to, okay, how am I going to shape my behavior this year? And then, kind of setting up sometimes to do some self-reflection throughout the year on these. And I like the idea of having students think them and talk them through about themselves and their peer groups as well.
Yeah, I've done that with a couple students, and again, kind of an eye opener to really deeply think about some of these different things. What do I hope others would say about me versus what am I doing in my everyday life to actually portray that or make them think those things about me? Yeah. Okay, so a lot of different resources. A lot of these are more staff focused for teaching, but have really great information in them as well. So bandwidth recovery, teaching with compassion, educating for empathy, and then teaching with empathy. So just a lot of different books and things like that that have good information about school empathy and how to improve those things. So learning to stand in somebody else's shoes, to see through their eyes, that's how peace begins. And it's up to you to make that happen. Empathy is a quality of character that can change the world, can change the school, can change a person, can change a lot of different things.
Yeah, absolutely. Like we talked about earlier, like empathy is a word that is thrown around a lot, and thank goodness it is. But thinking about when we're really aware, right, of our ability to extend empathy and be in that space, just thinking about the difference that it really can make for the students, for ourselves, for, right, like getting, kind of that bigger this cultural impact, right? Of like, yes, I help a student and then I feel better. And then I teach another teacher how to do that. And then the school is doing it. And then we go to a learning day with other schools and they're doing it, right? And just that effect, that domino effect it can really have in a positive way.
So I'm going to have us kind of go through some different scenarios, put us in groups. So after we read a scenario, you'll kind of talk through that with your group members to decide some of those questions, like how might you be feeling if this situation occurred? Could a staff member have a positive or negative impact on you? And then that last one of like, what could you do in that situation as an adult or a staff member to assist that student and be empathetic? So I think we are gonna kind of do that or model that a little bit.
Absolutely. And if you're watching the recording, obviously, you may have a partner with you if you're taking this with some coworkers or friends. But thinking, just like Bree said, of kind of just thinking through those scenarios. We've talked a lot today about self-reflection in regards to empathy. And so doing some of that self-reflection and thinking about, okay, what is my first reaction, right, when I hear this? Or if a student came up to me or a staff member came up to me and said this, like, let's do some gut checks, right? Like, what's my first reaction? And take an honest assessment of that, and then kind of transition to what may a more empathetic response be, and what kind of impact would that have on that person, or what kind of response would I want them to have if it was me in that situation?
Yeah. So kind of starting off, you were up all night because you share a room with multiple siblings. When you get to school, your teacher yells at you to wake up and pay attention. I would be feeling pretty embarrassed for like being called out.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, I think that feeling of, especially if I'm typically a quote unquote good student, right? Then it's like now I've got some feelings of shame or embarrassment. I might also be feeling angry, right? And as a student, I may have the unrealistic expectation that my teacher would know that I'm tired and to leave me alone, right? Or, just kind of that anger of, you don't get it, you don't understand, I don't want to tell you what's going on. So I could see lots of feelings coming up in that situation.
I think that second prompt, the staff member definitely could have a huge impact on if that's a positive or negative experience. And maybe just like pulling that student to the side or going to talk to them one-on-one and saying like, hey, is everything okay? You seem really tired. I just want to check in, see that everything's good. And maybe they explain, maybe they just say, I'm really tired, I'm sorry. But it goes a totally different route than kind of the first example.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, especially even, thinking about myself in a staff position, I may, yell is such an emotionally triggering word, right? But I may call a student out with the expectation that in my classroom we are paying attention or whatever it may be, and taking in the response that I get from that student, right? And I know we didn't get into it so much today. It's kind of a shorter training today, but there are multiple types of empathy. And so, one type of empathy is known as affective empathy. And what that talks about is, how do I respond to the sensations and the feelings that somebody else is experiencing in result to other people's emotions, right? And so in a classroom, we've got multiple emotions and feelings going on all of the time. And so as a teacher, if I say, Bree, like, what are you doing sleeping? And your reaction is like, oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. I don't know, right? I'm good. And you kind of are able to regroup relatively quickly and you're calm, right? Then it's like, okay, that was just kind of a weird what off. If you start crying or start slamming books or start, like, that affective empathy piece should really be that kind of like little alert in my body that goes, oh, there's some big feelings here, right? There's something else other than just sleeping, and being able to respond to that student's reactions based off of the emotions they show us.
Yeah. And maybe if everybody's thinking of empathy, that student goes, okay, that was not just directed at me. This person's talking, this person's doing this, and like I'm the one that got called out, being understanding. And then maybe that teacher going, that probably wasn't the best response, and I apologize. Like there was
And
a
I
lot
think
going on and you got the brunt of it.
yeah, and I think especially in those situations, right, where I may not understand the emotions that you're showing me. That's that second type of empathy, right? Is cognitive empathy of like, okay, like I identify what you're feeling. I understand your perspective, your feeling. This initial situation, right, when we're talking about a student who is falling asleep during class and gets kind of scolded or redirected to pay attention, if that's a student that's not a typical behavior for, or even a student who it is, right, and maybe as a teacher I'm really frustrated that it happens all the time, I may not at that moment have the cognitive empathy piece. I may not know why all of a sudden you're throwing your textbook across the room or slamming your desk down, but I can feel again that sensation of like, oh, right, and engage that empathetic process, because of the feelings that creates in my body based on the emotions you're showing. So yeah, as a student, I want that teacher to go, okay, like let's check in depending on my rapport with them. Let's check in after class, right? Or let's kind of see what's going on. Me personally as a student, right, don't want to have that conversation in front of anybody else. But,
Still, depending on the student, would mean a lot to have somebody recognize that maybe you're a little off and care enough to check in on you.
and I think thinking through too, being able to do some of that kind of relationship repair after class of like, oh, like let's talk through it. Maybe they're comfortable telling you what was going on. Maybe they're not. But I think as a teacher too, being aware and being in that place of empathy, right? If I'm having a morning, right, and I've still got to be somewhere as an adult, I want you to just let me be there, right? Please don't put me on the spot and ask me questions. Please don't challenge me. Please don't, put me on the spot in front of the class. Like, please accept that it's enough that I'm in this physical location right now, despite clearly having something going on.
Yeah. And I think that vulnerability, because we all have off days and we all snap sometimes. So I think maybe if you do say like, wake up, what are you doing? When you check in with that student, just saying like, hey, I had a rough morning and I apologize that ended up getting taken out on you. I'm so sorry. In the future, like I'll try to have a conversation with you about paying attention or whatever it might be. Yeah.
Absolutely. Bree, for the sake of time for this train, I'm going to have you pick one more. And then for those that are watching this later, you've got a good list up on the screen for you. So I'll get Bree's verbal permission, right? But taking these back to your coworkers, taking these back to the schools that you work in, right? Even adapting these maybe for some of the students that you're working with, and helping them think through some scenarios like this. So please use the wonderful work that Bree is sharing with us. But for today, let's talk through one more of these, Bree.
Yeah. We'll just do 4. Your dad yells at you often for everything at home, even when you do your chores. What you're asked, it never seems good enough. You're walking in the hallway and a teacher angrily questions why you were wandering in the halls, and you immediately shut down like you do with dad.
Yeah, that even without seeing that scenario played out live, right? That affective empathy piece, like again, that gut feeling, like, ugh, right? Like, yep. Yeah. We can feel that, and it doesn't
defeated. Yeah.
Yeah, feeling defeated. That lack, like that confidence drain, right? Yeah. I was gonna say maybe even fearful, right? Like here's another environment where like I can't please anybody, right? Or I'm not going to be successful,
or even like you talked about those bodily signals, like maybe that raised voice immediately causes some kind of trigger in your body to tense up and get anxious or whatever those feelings might be.
yeah. And I know the example talks about like shutting down, right? But I couldn't help but think about like becoming defensive as well, right? Of like, I'm in the hallway because I have a pass, right? Or because somebody else needed me, right? And like trying to, and maybe I'm not, maybe I'm in the hallway because I walked out of another classroom, right? But the way the teacher approaches me in that situation is going to make a huge difference on the information I share, how I react to that.
Yeah. And so maybe again, just a conversation about like, are you supposed to be somewhere? Is everything okay? Kind of just feeling out kind of what's going on, and instead of escalating immediately, just having a conversation with that student about what the scenario is.
Yeah. And I think this example is unintentionally, right? A really great example of that third type of empathy, which is called compassionate empathy. And that's a situation where it's like, we understand and share your emotions, right? I can understand now that you're upset or you feel defeated or whatever it may be. But in that situation, I'm not taking them on as my own, right? And so when we think about more like affective and cognitive empathy, it really is that Brene Brown video, right? Of I'm putting myself mentally, emotionally in a similar situation because I'm feeling that with you. This compassionate empathy, right, is okay. I do get it, right? I do understand that. I do share that emotional pull. It's deeper than sympathy. But in this situation, I'm not going to take them on as my own emotions, right? And so I think in these situations, especially if I have a kid who's really upset in the hallway and upset in like an angry way, right? A frustrated way. They're not sharing with me an issue of grief and loss or of hopelessness or things like that. This is, for a little kid term, this is our helping feeling, right? And so thinking about, okay, like I get that emotion, I get what you're feeling. I'm not going to take that on because that's not going to be beneficial in this situation. What I need to do is kind of explore ways to be able to help you in this situation, whether it's academic or social. And so, thinking about what that student may need at that moment or at that day. Maybe we're having lunch with them in the classroom, or we're giving them a project to do that allows them to walk the halls with purpose, right? I'm going, oh, like you need some time away. Can you go take this to the office, right? Or do this, and kind of helping them because we understand and can empathize with, I needed some space, right? Or I needed some time away, or whatever it may be. Bree, thank you so much for those examples. I want to keep you another hour and go through all of them, because it is great to be able to again engage in that self-reflection, but let's put ourselves in someone else's shoes, and practicing that skill of empathy, right? Okay, how would I feel in that situation? What is it, what is the time in my life that I have felt that? And I think remembering we don't need to have experienced exactly what someone else has experienced. Thank goodness we don't, right? Working in mental health, thank goodness I don't 100% know the lived experiences of all of my clients, but we can be empathetic without having lived those experiences if we're willing to be vulnerable enough to put ourselves emotionally in a place that elicited similar feelings and sensations. And so those examples there at the end, right, are written very, very well, and kind of catapult us into that situation and bring up some of those emotions for us. So thank you so much for sharing those. Anything else you'd like to share with us today, Bree?
I don't think so. Just a reminder that empathy is super helpful in all of your relationships.
Absolutely. We need like a mug or something that like empathy is my superpower thing, because it is vital to the success of our relationships, of creating an environment that feels safe for our students. So yeah, kind of making a promise to ourselves to work on extending empathy in our classrooms, in our schools, in the communities that we work for, and with, especially going into this next school year. So Bree, thank you so much. We always love having you on. If you guys have not attended or watched any of Bree's other trainings, please do so. She's going to have her own library with us soon. She brings some incredible information to us here at UNITA Training. It's silly, Bree. It's crazy to me. I don't know if we have another one on the books yet, so we're gonna have to work on that, because usually I get to end these trainings by telling you all when to join Bree again next. But if you're watching this, if you're a school-based provider, or you know a school-based provider, or if you have, you're a provider of any sort, and you've got some schools in your community that you're like, they need this. We'll loan Bree out to you. So Bree is wonderful at working with staff on professional development days and parents at at community resource nights and things like that. So if you've got other situations where you're like, yes, we want this information, reach out to us here at UNITA Training, and we'll get you connected with these trainings or with Bree. We are always happy to help. If you are looking for a provider and you're like, I need Bree in my life. Bree is, like I said, a therapist here at Heart Solutions. We will link her staff bio in the resource notes as well with the video that we watched and all of the resources that Bree has listed. Those books that she mentioned, some additional references, those will be on our website as well. You can click on them and purchase them directly from the website with these show notes. So Bree, as always, thank you so much for being here. Thank you to all of our participants. For those of you watching later, you will have a link here for your CE certificate, and let us know if you have any issues with that. But thank you all for joining us today, and don't forget that you need a training.
Thank you for joining in on today's training. We look forward to having you join us again. Heart Solutions is proud to provide CE-eligible trainings for our counseling community. This training may be eligible for continuing education credit hours through either the National Board for Certified Counselors, provider number 7376, or the Association of Play Therapy, provider number 21-645. To obtain CE hours for today's training, be sure to follow the steps in the description below.